and welcome to your favorite weekly series from Progress, Virginia. This is the Richmond Recap, and I'm your host, Kimberly Nario. Today is our first Richmond Recap in February, so happy Black History Month. We know that Black history happens every day, but we're happy to be celebrating today with you. We'll have a special guest joining us in the program later, but for now, let's get into these updates. As we approached crossover, we saw lots of movement on progressive issues in both the House and the Senate, and we here at Progress Virginia could not be more excited. Let's get started with criminal justice reform. The Senate marijuana omnibus bill from Senator Eben and Senator Lucas would eliminate or modify penalties related to marijuana in an attempt to equitably legalize the drug. This bill will be voted on today. Delegate Herring's bill to eliminate criminal penalties for possession of marijuana for adults aged 21 or over and provide automatic expungement for some marijuana-related convictions, HB 2312, passed the House floor earlier today. Now, we can't talk about pot without bringing up expungement. The Senate bill, which establishes a process for the sealing of police and court records for certain convictions, SB 1339, incorporated two other expungement bills that look to establish a process for the automatic expungement of criminal records for certain convictions. SB 1339 will pass today. Love to see the teamwork. There are two bills looking to abolish the death penalty. With both the Senate bill and the House bill passing their chambers today, Virginia looks to be on track to doing the right thing finally. On to more things Virginia has got to leave behind with the quickness: mandatory minimums. With both the House and Senate bills passing committee, both bills must pass their chambers today. As a reminder, mandatory minimums are racist. They lead to excessive sentences, and again, they're racist. And really, that should be enough for them to go bye-bye. In another effort to make the criminal justice system less racist, Senator Lucas's bill would create a statewide system for collecting data on people who are held in our jails before their trials and make the information public. By collecting this data, we could find out what's really happening in our criminal justice system. SB 1391, which passed the Senate, is the first step towards comprehensive criminal justice reform. We need it. On another note, both bills that deal with ending qualified immunity and increasing accountability of law enforcement, HB 2045 and SB 1440, failed in their respective chambers. No words on that, just rage. In voting rights news, we have our eyes on a few bills. The Senate Election Omnibus Bill, SB 1245, makes voting more accessible. Think ballot drop boxes, absentee ballots, and prepaid postage in all future elections. Delegate Price's and Senator McClellan's Voting Rights Act of Virginia puts in protections from the Federal Voting Rights Act into Virginia Code, providing stronger protections for Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and language minorities. This bill, HB 1890 and SB 1395, would also require localities to advertise voting changes in advance. And thankfully, both bills passed their respective chambers. The Senate version of Delegate Price's Voting Rights Act of Virginia from Senator McClellan, SB 1395, will pass today. The Commonwealth is looking to be more ready than ever to vote. But if we want our democracy to work, we need everyone involved, which brings us to constitutional amendments. The Rights Restoration Bill from Delegate Herring seeks to automatically restore the right to vote for people who have been convicted of a felony, but who have served their time and returned to society. A similar bill from Senator Locke guarantees a right to vote to all citizens 18 and over who are residents of the Commonwealth, effectively ending felony disenfranchisement and finally ridding our Constitution of this racist practice. I'm thrilled to say that Delegate Herring's bill, HJ 555, passed the House, and Senator Locke's bill, SJ 272, will need to pass today. If you think about it, taking away someone's right to vote after they've already paid their debt to society is cruel and unusual, and we are so not about that. We are also not about the constitutional provision defining marriage as only a union between one man and one woman. Senator Eben is looking to repeal that provision with SJ 270, and that just might happen because SJ 270 was amended to match the bill that already passed in the House, Delegate Sickles' HJ 582. The bills would establish a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the fundamental right of marriage to all, regardless of sex or gender, and establish that all marriages are treated equally under the law. And if that's not proof that change is a good thing, I don't know what is. Now, let's take a look at workers' rights. In a classic good news, bad news situation, Delegate Ayala's House bill for paid family and medical leave was laid gently on the table. Looks like there's more research needed, so not all hope is lost. It's just sort of put on hold. But in some actual good news, Delegate Tran's bill to help people remain eligible for unemployment benefits when returning to work would be unsafe for COVID-related reasons, HB 2037, passed the House. It's no surprise that we need legislation like this while we're all still navigating the pandemic. And if people are working in unsafe conditions, they shouldn't be forced to work, period. And in more good news, the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights from Senator McClellan is on its way to passing the Senate, and its companion bill in the House passed its chamber. As a reminder, these bills, SB 1310 and HB 2032, include provisions for ensuring domestic workers are covered under employment protection laws and inclusion in the Virginia Workers' Compensation Act. They also establish protections for domestic workers, eliminate minimum wage loopholes, and prohibit discrimination. Speaking of minimum wage loopholes, did you know that farm workers are exempt from state minimum wage? Well, Delegate Ward's bill is looking to change that. HB 1786, which removes the exemption from Virginia minimum wage requirements for farm workers, passed the House. Virginia is becoming more inclusive and more equitable. To talk to us more about what that means for immigrant communities, from the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights, please welcome Luis Oyola. Hi, Luis. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Kimberly. Thank you so much for having me on.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work with VSEER?
Sure. So I am currently the chair of VSEER's State Policy Committee. However, in sort of more full-time basis, I am director of organizing at Legal Aid Justice Center.
Awesome. So last session, driver privilege cards passed. And this session, there's a bill to add privacy language. Can you tell us why adding privacy language is so important?
Yes. So this is Kathy Tran's bill, which would establish a series of policies governing how, when DMV is allowed to release information to ICE. The reason for this bill is that there's in other states that have implemented either driver's license access for people regardless of immigration status or a separate driver privilege card like Virginia did last year. There's already been a history of ICE using those databases in those other states to facilitate detaining people. So
basically, we need this to pass ASAP.
Exactly, and the big reason for that is that so many people in the immigrant communities keep getting detained. Keep falling under ICE detention because they're just driving. A cop, profiles them or finds the smallest reason to stop them, like broken taillight, and then finds that they're driving without a license. And in Virginia, you can put someone in jail for that. And going to jail is one of the biggest triggers for ICE to start deportation proceedings for people. So that whole atmosphere creates a ton of fear that keeps people from living in the shadows, not wanting to drive when we're in the US. It's a very car-centric culture. You can't survive without being able to drive. And so this adding these privacies, the intent here is to remove more reasons for that fear so that people are actually able to get the card and are actually able to drive without having it in the back of their heads that, a simple stop could mean deportation proceedings.
Absolutely. So Vizier also does tons of work around financial aid equity. Mm-hmm. And the bills for that have passed both chambers this session. Can you talk about the work that went into making that happen and the impact you see in the community?
It started with the fight to ensure that people would be able to access in-state tuition in the first place, regardless of immigration status. That finally happened during the 2020 regular session. And so this year, the next step was so that to have state financial aid open up for people who qualify for in-state tuition. So it's sort of the next step in ensuring equity, that not just people who had lack of immigration status as the only barrier to in-state tuition now have that barrier removed, but now also they're able to get the financial aid that they qualify for. As it stands, students who are undocumented can't get FAFSA, they can't get federal aid. So this would establish a different system that is strict directly with the state so that they can still access state-based financial aid. And it is a huge win, because we really have gone from, well, if you're here, quote unquote, illegally, then why should we give you special access to, say, tuition? We've gone from that, to being in the position of even a lot of Democrats, right, to now we've even gotten some bipartisan support for this latest bill. And the good news is that it passed the House chamber and the Senate chamber. And it is identical language. So that means that, we can assume same support on the opposite chambers, and it'll just go straight to the governor and become law.
Excited to see the progress on that one. As we all know, session is a very busy time, and it can be tough to keep up with how quickly things move. So what's something that you wish more people were paying attention to right now?
I think the budget. I don't think enough people pay attention to the budget, and the fact that, not only does the budget determine the priorities of the government in terms of how much money they allocate for X, Y, or Z, but there's a lot of almost legislation that happens through budget amendments. And I'm not a fiscal policy expert. For those who want to find out more about fiscal policy, I definitely recommend that people look into the Commonwealth Institute. But I have learned in my experience with Vizier how important budget conversations are. And so just to highlight some budget amendments that are important this session, again, Delegate Tran has a budget amendment in that would require that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion with Governor Northam do a study on language access across their state agencies. We've seen, especially with COVID and the state trying to do all of these programs to provide access to relief during the pandemic, they've been very inaccessible to immigrants because they don't have proper language access. And that goes back to years and years of neglecting language access. But here we have it. It's a very present problem. So this budget amendment, if it gets incorporated into the budget that the governor signs, would do a 1-year study of where we need to improve language access.
Awesome. And what's something our audience can do to help support the amazing work of Vizier?
I would say keep up with Vizier on social media. It's Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights. It's on Facebook, it's on Twitter, and there's also the website. And also, there are many groups across the state of Virginia that are doing something related to immigrant rights, whether it's supporting immigrants during the pandemic, pushing for policy changes that are friendlier to immigrants. There's a lot of things. So, if people find themselves doing that work and they're trying to join a coalition with other organizations that are doing that work, like Progress VA, they should consider joining.
Awesome. Well, Recap Royalty, you know what to do. Luis, thanks so much for speaking with us today and for sharing the incredibly important work of this year.
Thank you so much for having me on, and everybody have a great day and keep pushing forward with the General Assembly.
Before we sign off, there's a little more good news to share over in higher education. The bill to establish the Get Skilled, Get a Job, Give Back program, SB 1405, passed the Senate. As a reminder, the identical House bill passed its chamber last week. And on the housing rights front, the Virginia Residential Landlord and Tenant Act seeks to provide protections for tenants and accountability for landlords. The Senate bill passed its chamber this week, as did the House bill. Safe and affordable housing was an issue before the pandemic, and this is no time for anyone to be capitalizing on tenants having a hard time. For my nature buffs and really anyone who needs clean air and clean water, this environmental justice update is for you. The bill to end the coal tax credit, SB 1252, will pass Senate today, as will Senator Hashmi's Environmental Justice Act, which seeks to permanently establish an environmental justice working group to ensure that state agencies are centering environmental justice in their work. A similar bill, HB 2074, passed in the House. And keeping on theme, all ratepayer bills passed the House today. Too long didn't read. Good things are happening when it comes to environmental justice. More specifically, several bills are very close to passing their chambers. Now, for our heroes and our zeros. Our hero for the week is Senator McClellan, not only for handling interrupters like a boss, but for explaining the difference between equality and equity. Our zero for the week: men who constantly interrupt, don't understand privilege, and say problematic things about sexual assault. There's just too many of them to name, and I'm only talking about in the General Assembly. A quick shout out to Go Red for Women. They encourage awareness of the issue of women and heart disease and also action to save more lives. Cardiovascular disease takes the life of 1 in 3 women, so it's important to raise awareness and resources. Visit goredforwomen.org for more information. Thanks for joining us, Richmond Recap Royalty. Follow us here on Facebook, as well as Instagram, Twitter, and of course, TikTok. We hope to see you next week because, hey, it's nice to have your mug around.